Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. My guests today are Reid Hamilton and Steve Rush, authors of an intriguing new book, Better Get It in Your Soul, What Liturgists Can Learn from Jazz. Welcome to Rip Rap.
Thanks. Good to be here.
What an intriguing book project you've got here. And I was fascinated with the question of where did the book come from? So maybe you can share where it came from, because there are all those people that were in the history of how you approached this.
Well, as I said in the acknowledgement, the immediate cause was Steve just insisted that we write the book. So it came a lot from his energy and just the desire to get the material out there. But as we finished up the book, I began thinking about sort of where it came from in terms of the people I've worked with. And so Ted Hackett, one of the priests at Candler School of Theology, where I went to divinity school, was also a psychologist and had a real appreciation for the deep psychology of worship and liturgy. Bill Flynn, organist at Emory, was also somebody who had a lot of appreciation for lighting and space and timing, silence and sound in liturgy. And I've been working so much around those issues with Steve that we were able to sort of call that together in a book about what we're doing at Canterbury House. And
I found it interesting when you're talking about silence. You know, it's not exactly the absence of sound, it's just sound not happening, I think, or what.
You better talk about silence, man.
Well, I mean, it's also the eternal sound, you know, and there's so many mystics and theologians and musicians. Like Thomas Merton talks about silence, and the real essence of God is found in that. And John Cage, of course, has a whole book called Silence and a piece called 4:33, which is 4 minutes 33 seconds of silence, which I actually perform a lot on various instruments, which sounds like it's a comedy routine, but it's not. But the idea of silence being really important and crucial in a liturgy is something that is not really often addressed. There's a fair amount of books out there, like cookbooks, for what music to use in your church service, and it's just basically a guide to a hymn book. I mean, what we're looking at, I think, is what music can you use? Actually, what sound can you use at various points in the service? For instance, we use a huge gong. It's about a 2-foot gong at the beginning of our services, just to let people enter into the silence. And in a way, it's kind of a gesture of humility on the part of the liturgical planners, saying, you know what, we can plan to the moon, but what we can't do is anticipate that sort of speech of the Holy Spirit, you know, the speech of God into one's soul, or that whatever that is, you know, that gets into the title, Better Get It in Your Soul.
That's interesting you should say about Merton, too, who spent his whole career as a monk looking for more silence. And he writes actually very pathetically, in a way, about how difficult silence is to find. And certainly, you know, Canterbury House is right on Huron Street. There's always some traffic going by. There's a building being built right across the street now.
Yeah.
So silence at Canterbury House, you know, has content. And not only sonic content, but a content of meaning.
Well, it's a contradiction to the students' lives, too, because the students are plugged in. There's this sort of, like to call it electronic ADD factor going on, where, you know, there's the iPod thing, there's the Facebook thing, there's LinkedIn. All these things are just doubling up. So there's data flow going on all the time for these poor kids. entering into silence, I think, is critical for them. It's really, really important to unplug that thing, to let them, let the ground lie fallow for a year before you replant. Basically, they don't have that, and students at Michigan are. I mean, they really work hard. They're really smart. They are really, really bright. It's a little scary, but the momentum part of that, I think we help them unplug it a little bit.
Well, and if you don't have all that sound going on, then you have to look at the inner self.
Yeah.
Or whatever is
Yeah.
on the interior, which I found that fascinating. And it's sometimes silence is very, very difficult to deal with. The research has shown American conversation, there is no silence.
Mm-hmm.
The people talk on top of each other, and if there's a gap of more than 20 or 30 seconds, people get very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a deliberate attempt to set aside that interruptibility.
And that's something that I learned from Bill Flynn, was just to listen for silence, and to appreciate its importance in liturgy. That's how we get into the presence of God and situate ourselves for worship.
I noticed that you had talked about Don Postman in this book, and this is also kind of the framework that you were using. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Don is an old friend, figuratively and literally. But he's I just saw him a couple days ago, and we're always keeping track with each other's little wild excursions around the world. And he and I worked about 10 years, I guess it was, at Campus Chapel. I had read his book. In fact, I had taught his book in a Sunday school class when I was in grad school. His book, Space for God, which is an incredible book on essentially prayer, and a lot about silence, by the way. And he has a way of looking at the integration of the arts and spirituality that I think is truly important. Specifically, Van Gogh and Rembrandt in his book, but he helped me, kind of get a little deeper into, I guess, self-integration, I guess I would call it. But it was a winter day, and I was walking around Ann Arbor, I guess the second year I was here, and I walked past Campus Chapel, and I read the name Don Postman. I thought, you've got to be kidding. He's here in town? I'd never done the math, thinking, well, here you go. So I went in, and he was on sabbatical doing one of his crazy jaunts, and when he came back, we basically worked informally. I was never the musician there officially, but they had these student organists that would be good for about 3 months, and then they would get distracted and do some recital or defend their dissertation, and then I'd come in and play for another 5 months. And so we did a lot of experimenting. They had a thing called I guess they called it a liturgy committee, but they actually met every week, and they critiqued, can you imagine this? They critiqued the previous week's service from top to bottom, from prelude to postlude, including the sermon. It was incredible, and it was about 10 people.
Wow.
And from there, that kind of critical thinking was really, really a primer in, okay, how can liturgy be improved? And of course, no one was really digging at, some of the issues that we're talking about, like, well, the planning part of it, because Don, being a campus minister, you only have so much time to put into liturgy, frankly. So he's,
That's interesting, because it sounds like y'all were doing sort of from the back end of the process what we're doing from the front end, which is, what is it going to look like, when we do it. And we plan our services from beginning to end very carefully. I often say that Canterbury House is actually a high church experience, even though people come in and the mood is very relaxed and the music is very upbeat and really irresistible to listen to, and yet a lot of planning goes into the spontaneity.
Oh yeah, the formal structure is intense, actually, at Canterbury House, and we talk about that. I mean, we really wrestle, I think, is the word I like the best. We really wrestle primarily with the text, the readings, and we look at them very, very carefully and critically. We usually rip them apart, and we're open about admitting, well, I don't believe that reading actually, or I really am skeptical about whether Jesus actually said that, or whatever, or why did they pick that reading? That's a one that often comes up, because the lectionary is prescribed by the church fathers, and
Whoever they are.
yeah, well, they're somewhere out there, but yeah, we kind of question their abilities to to parse it, but having said all that, we spend that time, and really the planning meetings are more about that than they are picking really diverse music, or music that's really exciting and interesting or entertaining.
Like that phrase, diverse music. Let's all have diverse music.
Whatever that means.
Yes, whatever that is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's Scottishes and waltzes. I don't know, but
Polkas, don't
yeah,
forget
it's
polkas.
One
right.
of the questions I had when you were at the campus chapel, what was the impact on you as a musician to have the critique after to that extent?
There wasn't a lot of talk about the music, frankly, and usually what it was I would do something spontaneous, like at the communion I would just pick anything out of the hymn book and then just improvise it, and then at the liturgy meeting after that, they would just, that was so amazing, that was so amazing. Well, now we actually write that kind of stuff right into the service, but yeah, it was to answer your question, there wasn't a lot of influence on.
I find that fascinating. So what they were critiquing was the sermon and the various liturgical.
Well, in hymn choice, I think I think that was often something that came up as well. That was a little bit, but we didn't experiment a whole lot. There was some experimentation. The most outrageous, I think, was there was a service based on names for God, which was really, really a fun service, and it was a bulletin that was completely blank, taking a page out of John Cage, so to speak, and then on the outside were all these names just put all over the place, different names for God, rock and shelter and mountain and wind and all this stuff, and then people suggested readings. It was a very Quaker experience, actually, because people suggested things, suggested songs. There was a lot of silence.
So that service was, in fact, totally improvised.
Yeah. Completely.
Yeah.
But that was one time
service,
in 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So it wasn't often, and it was more about experimentation than improvisation, because I brought in some really playful Hasidic dances that had been arranged for piano by this wonderful composer, actually now on the faculty, Paul Schoenfield, and Paul had this 5 Hasidic dances, I think they were called, and I used those as a framework for a clown service. But and the communion was like it was like potato chips and ginger ale, and
you heretic.
Don wore a clown nose, it was loads of fun, and we lost funding because of that, because people were very upset. There's nothing funny about the communion, so but there was a sense of play and a sense of discourse. But I think at that time too, I was probably a tad unwilling to sit down and plan every single service and look at all the readings, and plus he's a different kind of collaborator.
But that was a key concept. The one concept I kept thinking about is you're talking about this as an ongoing process. The crucial part of the ongoing process is collaboration.
Absolutely.
You bet.
Absolutely.
And that's what you've been saying too. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because you're really going through this, like you said, on the front end, planning what's going to happen.
The model that way too many churches and liturgical planners use, and one that I have participated way too much in and was deeply frustrated with, is the model where the priest or the pastor is off in his or her office, and they read the readings and they start sketching out a sermon. and the musician is off in their office with the liturgical cookbook that says, okay, you know, it's the third Sunday in Lent, so we have to play 40 days and 40 nights. All right, and then they get together on maybe Tuesday before the service, and they have a staff meeting where they put the bulletin together. And then on Sunday, the priest preaches the sermon, and the musician plays the music, and usually they play it plenty square. And so if you're using that model of liturgical planning, then maybe, if you're lucky, a couple of times a year, the priest and the musician will look at each other at the end of the service, and they'll say, wow, that really worked, that really clicked. But it's an accident, okay, if that happens, because they're not actually working together. Whereas at Canterbury House, we sit down week by week, and we talk together. Both of us have prepared. Both of us have thought about, Steve will have thought about how he would preach these lessons if he were called on to preach. I will be thinking about what music I would pick to go with, you know, the themes that I'm seeing in the service. So that we're planning beforehand to have that moment at the end of the service when we go, wow, that really worked. And in 5 years now of doing this together, we've looked at each other and said, gee, that didn't work how many times? Ever? Once, maybe. There was once.
Yeah. And it was never our fault. You know.
One question I had is, how has this affected each of you in doing this? Because you're so intimately in this, so intensively involved with this. Have you evolved, or
Oh God, yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, for one thing, we've become increasingly good friends, which is a real joy and a privilege to me.
Well, maybe the only way that this model works, you know. I mean, if you doing conferences and somebody says, you know, I'm an organist at this church and I can't stand the minister or the priest.
I don't trust the musician here, exactly.
You know, there's stuff in the book about that, like how you can bridge that a little bit, and how you can get to know each other. I mean, just getting back to Postma a little bit, I read about 30 of his favorite books before I ever met him, because I read the bibliography of his book, you know. So I sat down and talked to him, and I kind of knew his bent on things, you know. And Reid and I have done, we're always trading, you know, ideas, book titles, movie titles, I mean, music, everything. So.
Well, and I've learned a lot about jazz from you, and it's a type of music and an idiom that I knew very little about when I came to Canterbury House, and now I just can't get enough. So, you know, I've certainly learned that.
Well, one phrase in terms of musician, you use the thing of caring, the caring musician. And I imagine from a priest standpoint that's important. You have someone that actually cares what happens and is working with you instead of just, it's a performance, okay, I'll play this hymn, rap, doom, gone.
Yeah, and you know, I've worked with lots of musicians who are opinionated.
No.
And Steve might actually be one of them. But their opinions are really about, you know, what we can and cannot do in a liturgy, and what they will and will not tolerate, you know, in terms of.
You mean what their borders are?
Music, what they're willing to, you know, what they're willing to play and not willing to play, you know, and. One of the things that I think you have that's really great for me is a large repertoire, and an unusual one at that. And, you know, let's do "I Walk the Line" for an anthem. Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard any musician say that to me before.
Come on, Johnny Cash has his place. He was a Christian.
I often tell people I'm never going to work in another church where the musician doesn't have a turkey call. No turkey call? Sorry, I'm not coming.
Well, and then from the musician standpoint of having someone that is flexible and willing to look for other options rather than the same old, because, you can get locked into the formula.
Well, I guess the advantage I have is that I'm not a career church musician. I'm really a career composer, jazz musician, and a professor, so...
You've been working in campus ministry all this
I know.
time, you lucky dog.
I know. But it's, well, but you know what I mean? It's I think there's a different thing here. There's that business of, is it a gig or is it a calling? For me, and I said this many times before, I don't know if I'd actually go to church if Canterbury House wasn't there. I really don't. I don't know if I could hack it. Disorganized, sloppy liturgy, not coherent, not well put together, and musically down the mainstream.
And that's even if the musician is competent, which is not always the case.
No, not likely. Right. Not likely. So that, it's a difficult situation, but and also I teach collaboration. It's what I do. All my classes at University of Michigan have to do fundamentally with the idea of collaboration. So this is the thing that really gets me excited about life, is putting ideas together and having somebody dump in, contradict, develop.
Steve was on the search committee at Canterbury House when I was looking for this job. This is my 5th academic year there now. And one of the things that was entailed in getting the job was coming to Canterbury House and doing a service, which meant planning it with Steve. And of course, we had to do it by email. I was in Ohio, he was in Michigan. But we really managed to hit it off almost instantly in that email exchange of, just tossing back ideas back and forth. Before we ever talked about exactly what the service was going to look like or what the music was going to be, just how do you want to do this and what do we want to try to get across? And how did we hit on Martin Luther King for that service, by the way? Do you even remember?
I have no idea.
I don't remember either. Oh, well.
I remember the service and I remember the collaboration,
Yeah.
It was very much like weirdly enough, sort of out of time, because of email not being a time-based medium, we were still having this really protracted discussion about the lectionary readings and our view on Martin Luther King and all kinds of parameters.
And some themes that we wanted to get across.
But not really talking, and I refused to even mention any musical ideas. I just absolutely was not going to go there. And that had to be interesting to you. Like, well, what's up with this guy? He actually wants to talk about, what I want to talk about.
Oh, well, I was thrilled about that. And, by the way, I had some musical ideas, which was probably a piece of the puzzle for you.
Right.
I'm guessing was, okay, does this priest actually care about music or not?
Well, and the suggestions, are they just absolutely egregiously horrible and mainstream, or are they remotely interesting, And I think we know that, your contribution was interesting. But,
he scores.
Well, no. And that's sort of the thing, too, when students, man, the things that they like music choices, it's bizarre. Like, one student actually was thrilled that we did Rock of Ages. It would never occur to me to pick a prelude or postlude that would, I've got some pretty advanced musicians that I work with at Canterbury House.
Well, and we've the students, the congregation has also learned from this, and they too, really like the material. And when they see that, the prelude's going to be Enlightenment or the postlude's going to be Rocket Number 9,
They
get it.
That's what I was going to ask
charge
you.
out of it.
What's been the reaction of the people coming to the Mass in this service?
Universally, they really love it. Worship at Canterbury House is challenging in the sense that it's a small space. Everybody's very close to one another. The music is in fact loud, considering just because of the instrumentation and the space that we're in, which is just it's small. But people are engaged and really know when the service is done that they've been involved in something, and so the reaction to that is usually very positive.
Well, and we plan very deliberately to have people involved in this. I mean, I don't suggest that we do tunes like hymns and whatnot. Whatever, sung tunes. Hymns isn't exactly what we do anyway, but I don't suggest that we do things that aren't really singable. Stuff that's really, really, really either fun to sing or interesting to sing. And that, by the way, can include Russian Orthodox music in 4-part harmony. We did a service a couple weeks ago where there was there Greek, Polish, French, Spanish, Latin, and English. A lot of folk might say, well, that's going to be too complex and difficult. Well, if the expectation is that you don't just sit and listen to an organist play and kind of sit in your pew and do nothing, you're expected to actually muscle through this and do it. Then people they kind
got to figure out how to pronounce the Norwegian.
Right, right. Well, that's right. We did this beautiful
Christus
Norwegian.
Denanda.
Yes,
it's great.
Gorgeous Norwegian. It's Swedish.
One of the favorite pieces that we do at Canterbury House.
Yeah.
Well, I'll disclose one of my favorite pieces. but the students, sing it right along, and
Yep.
they have the expectation. They sense that something is expected of them in the worship, and they actually respond to that.
So they get used to the change and the ever change that's going on.
Well, and newcomers too still, appreciate that that they are being called forth in this worship.
Well, and to that end, if we're throwing something at them that is a real curveball, like something that's formally complex or even kind of set out in the bulletin in a strange way, I'll rehearse it with them. And part of that is I don't want it to go poorly, but it also sends the message to the congregation that it's not some weird karaoke experience.
Wait a minute. You're rehearsing music in the service?
That's correct, sir. That's correct.
But no church does that. You're supposed to rehearse before.
Some do, but to be fair, but rarely, because it's looked at as an intrusion on the kind of formality or just the flow or the scheme or even the theatricality. But the message it sends is that, it's really important that you make this thing work. And sometimes they'll clap at the end after the postlude, they'll clap, and the band will turn right around and clap at the congregation for the way they've contributed to the music throughout. Yeah. It's really
it's very everybody's in it. Everybody's in it, I think, which is really the key. Everybody's in it.
That's the hope anyway.
And the structure of the service, the liturgy is open enough, improvisational enough that if some rehearsal is needed, we can do it. And it becomes part of the service. The rehearsal itself is part of the liturgy. We expect you to be engaged with God while we are doing this, so here's how you get in.
We've run out of time, unfortunately, so thank you for being on Rip Rap.
Thanks so much for having us.
At his feet the six-winged seraphim, cherubim with sleepless eye, veil their faces to the presence, as with ceaseless voice